Hey guys, Noam here, Citation 501, owner and pilot. When I had a Cessna 414 back in the day, I was the biggest fan of Jerry Wagner, where he's flying around his Cessna 421 all over California. And I still love his videos and his channel, but he recently posted a video of his own pilot error situation, which I found very serious and a fantastic learning opportunity for all of us. So it's no easy thing for someone to publicly admit and publish their own flying mistakes. And it could have been just as easily stayed between him, his co-pilot, and ATC forever. And none of us would have been given the opportunity and a chance to learn from it. So let's thank Jerry for sharing his footage and also giving me the permission to make this video, which will help us learn from his mistakes and hopefully become better pilots because of it. So let's get straight to it and dive into his video and his mistake. While you watch, please put aside your Monday quarterback within you and put on your "this could be me" attitude instead, because I feel there are many things to learn here. To sum it up, he misprogrammed his Garmin approach sequence prior to being given the approach clearance while still in the clouds. Once given the approach clearance, by pressing the nav button on his autopilot, the autopilot flew the misprogrammed route. That's not good, but it can happen. If you've been flying for a long time, it's happened to the best of us. He turned off the autopilot, laser focused on fixing the Garmin programming mistake that began this whole situation. While fidgeting with his Garmin, the plane banks hard to the right and pitches down, unnoticed by Jerry. Let's watch.
Autopilot off. We got to go to NCOL here.
Now I'm scrambling, flying by hand to get us back on course.
Autopilot off. We got to go to NCOL here.
Now I'm scrambling, flying by hand to get us back on course.
Now, before letting yourself think, he's a bad pilot, I'm the best, please acknowledge that this statement has zero value. It's not making him better, and it's not making you yourself a better pilot. It's perhaps feeding your ego a bit, which actually can result in you becoming a worse pilot than before, actually. So we're going to put our "this could be me" hats on and continue analyzing the situation. Let's rewind back and try to find all the tiny little mistakes that piled up and led to this event. I have personally identified 3: sterile cockpit, hand flying and IMC techniques, and situational awareness. Number 1 is sterile cockpit, because like Jerry, I also record my own flights and publish them on YouTube. There's a lot of self-induced pressure to talk to the audience throughout the flight, especially during the most interesting yet critical moments: takeoff, climb, approach, and landing. And I'm guilty of that as well. But technically, sterile cockpit below 10,000 feet has a ton of merit and is commonly used by airline pilots. Making comments for the audience in IMC below 10,000 feet has only disadvantages and zero advantages. The only goal below 10,000 feet is to fly focused, safe, and well. Now that that's out of the way, number 2, hand flying and IMC. For those who don't know, IMC stands for Instrument Meteorological Conditions. God, that's hard to say. In other words, every time I will say IMC, I'm saying flying inside the clouds where you can't see outside, and you rely slowly on your instruments to keep your desired attitude of your aircraft, pointing up, down, banking right, left, or just a level flight. Hand flying in IMC is not the easiest thing in the world, but with practice, it's quite okay. A quick and important story for you guys is that when I had my Cessna 414 and I was new to it, I trained with a friend who was also a Spirit Airlines 737 captain. Our lesson was to hand fly only, no autopilot allowed. One time we flew and I reached cruise and I asked him to fly for a bit so I could just relax. He laughed and said, "Yeah, no, it was a very busy departure, all in IMC, I'll fly for a bit." So we were still at IMC and cruise, and I just stared at the left window, just kind of like digesting how busy the departure was. And after staring at the left wing for like 30 seconds, I looked back at the instrument panel in front of me and we were banked like 45 degrees to the right. I yelled, "Andy, attitude, attitude." He instantly corrected and said something I'll never forget. "Oh shit, man, I rarely hand fly anymore. Sorry, if you don't use it, you lose it." And I didn't think Andy is a bad pilot. He's not. But this moment changed my way of thinking. How could a professional, active, seasoned airline pilot make such a simple mistake? And that's when I realized we are all susceptible to any mistake that ever existed. But focusing now on Jerry's hand flying, here's what I think about it. When you let the autopilot fly in clear skies and you turn it off, all is well, and the transition from autopilot to hand flying is nice, natural, and smooth. Because you're looking outside at the horizon for reference, and that by itself is natural. When you let the autopilot fly in IMC, and then you start hand flying for one reason or another, you instantly suck. For the first moment, you are bad. Probably wings level is the best you could achieve for the first few seconds. Your brain needs to acclimate. It needs to realize that you're hand flying in IMC now, and there is the classic six-pack scan that needs to take place. When we hand fly in IMC, we are all incapable on focusing on any other task for more than a few seconds. Any task that has to take place, such as a checklist, briefing an approach, you name it, has to be chopped up into 2-second sections, 2-second increments, so we can go back and perform one full scan of the primary instruments. This is flying the airplane. What Jerry did was turn off the autopilot because it was acting up for all practical purposes, which was absolutely the appropriate thing. Again, Jerry's intuition was correct. Autopilot off, wings level, and ask any experienced pilot and they'll agree. But he instantly dove into his Garmin to correct the sequencing problem. Laser-focused tunnel vision. He didn't even let himself hand fly for 3 seconds. Into the Garmin, his whole mind, body, and soul went. You can see it. You can feel it. If you get a chance, look up Eastern Airlines 401 crash. The incredibly experienced pilots put the gear down for landing, and one of the landing gear indicator lights did not turn green, so they aborted the landing and flew up to troubleshoot the landing gear. And by accident, somebody in the cockpit inadvertently disconnected the autopilot, and they failed to even notice that. They were so focused on why the gear didn't come down and troubleshooting it, and didn't even notice that the autopilot was off and the plane just crashed into the ground and everybody died. They didn't even see it coming. All the eyeballs in the cockpit were on the checklist and the procedures to fix the landing gear issue. And nobody even looked outside or in the gauges and the instrument panel to make sure the plane was still flying as it should. As it turns out, there was no issue with the landing gear. They all three came down and it was perfect. It was just a burnt out light bulb. The immense gravity to fix a problem is perhaps human nature. As good pilots, we are sometimes supposed to put our human tendencies aside, right? So Jerry turned off his autopilot, dove into his Garmin, and tried to fix it. And maybe out of curiosity of why it was misbehaving, and within 3 seconds, he ended up in a very steep bank and nose-low attitude. It only took him 6 seconds to fix the issue with the Garmin, to sequence it properly. And that was just by chance. It could have taken him 15 seconds. He could have been inverted by that time. By the time he got it fixed, it's impossible to say when he would have looked at the instruments and resumed actual flying. But all we know is that for 6 seconds, he didn't do that at all. And that's a huge deal. A pilot's biggest job, above all, is to keep the damn airplane flying and under his command, his or her command. Everything else is secondary. If the plane is doing something you didn't tell it to, you're screwing up big time. So let's not beat a dead horse. What can we learn from this? Here are my thoughts. If we ever transition from autopilot to hand flying for one reason or another, take time to relearn how to fly. It may take us 5 seconds to calibrate our brains to the new task, but you need it. We need it. We must acclimate to the new hand flying situation. Start up a scan, run it a few times through the six-pack, and get into the groove. Whatever. And for sure, do it in the easiest situation possible. Wings level before you advance to like level 2 and initiate a bank or an altitude change. Heck, at the minimum, make sure you're wonderfully trimmed and you could take your hands off the yoke without the plane doing anything funny. But let's quickly go back and focus on the Garmin. Why? What's the rush? Like I said before, curiosity, a strong desire to fix an earlier mistake? How about shame, not wanting to admit to ATC that you made a mistake? I have to tell you, this is a big one. None of us want to say, hey ATC, I screwed up, I'm not perfect, please help me and give me the number for the FAA to call after the flight. Eventually, Jerry did advise ATC his plane was not going where it was supposed to.
30 Juliet, the airport's inside. We got thrown off the course here by the autopilot.
Now we're sitting here, amazing Monday morning quarterbacks, thinking, I would have never zoned into that Garmin like that. Well, bullshit. You might have. Or you're thinking, I would have confessed to ATC as soon as the autopilot started acting up and turning the wrong way. Well, I call bullshit too on that. But after watching this video and learning from Jerry's mistake, you might now immediately advise ATC. You might now just focus only on hand flying for at least the first 30 seconds after turning off the autopilot. So what's the big problem with your plane deviating from its intended path or heading assigned by ATC? It's actually a big deal, right? If ATC tells you to turn right heading 060 and for whatever reason your plane starts turning left, you could be on an instant collision course with another aircraft. And if you're on an instrument approach, you're no longer protected from terrain if you deviate from that approach path. You can run into a mountain, and since you're IMC, you'd just be dead. You wouldn't even know it happened to you. Well, hindsight's 20/20, but now I can rehearse what I would say to ATC if for some reason my plane goes somewhere it was not intending to. NorCal approach, I'm all screwed up here. Heading, please. That's it. That's my new line. My new script. ATC, I'm all screwed up. Heading. I need a heading. Trust me, once you have this script, you'll be much more likely to use it, I think. If they don't give me a heading right away and want to be nosy and ask me what's happening, I'll just say, emergency, need a heading now. So what's so cool about a heading from ATC? Do you guys know? It's magic. It's loaded. When ATC gives us a heading, they're also guaranteeing us terrain separation, terrain clearance. They have this thing called MVA, minimum vectoring altitude. Below this altitude, they cannot give you a heading legally because you could hit a mountain. So when you get some heading, you know you're above their MVA, and that's really nice. Here's what the MVA diagram looks like around Oakland, where Jerry's landing. For example, if he's here, as long as he's above 2,300 feet, they could give him endless headings to stay within this segment, knowing well he will not hit terrain. Impossible. If they want to take you to this segment, they'll have to climb you first to 2,800 feet before you enter it. So if he was below their MVA and he asked for help, they technically could not give him a heading. But if he's in trouble, they would still give him a heading and ask to expedite a climb to at least their MVA in that sector. I personally think that if he immediately said, NorCal approach, November 513, Sierra Juliet, I'm all screwed up here, heading please, they would have instantly given him a heading. Fly heading 120, climb maintain 3000. They may have even appreciated that the immediate honesty and just circled him back around for another go at the approach. Nobody would have cared. Sorry for the language. Nobody would have given a shit. Okay, so let's move on to number 2, situational awareness. Now, Jerry has it. He has situational awareness by watching a lot of his other videos. There's no doubt about it. He knows where he is while he's being vectored, and he can easily say, I'm on a big left downwind for the RNAV 10 left or whatnot. The issue I have with the scenario is all quite too common for IFR pilots, I believe. The damn Garmin and their stupid activate vectors to final, in my opinion, is a weak feature that should never be used. And pilots use it out of laziness or lack of knowing any other way. Or that just because ATC says expect vectors for the ILS, etc., it doesn't mean you should be using the vector to final feature. Let's see what vectors to final actually does on the Garmin 750. Let's take Hillsboro, my home airport, for example, RNAV 31 left. Activate vectors to final. It highlights the final approach fix, which is Intel. And if we hit direct enter, and it will just take us directly there. If we activate the approach and hit nav, it will fly directly to Intel. I have a huge problem with that. It's impossible to start an approach at the final approach fix. It's illegal. ATC would never allow it. They're not allowed to do it. So why would it be the default fix? In fact, ATC cannot give you a heading intercept of less than 3 nautical miles from the final approach fix. So basically, it has to be 3 nautical miles from the final approach fix or further. The problem is worse in the Garmin 530, like the one I have on my citation. Activating vectors to final, RNAV 31 left, gives me fixes only between Intel, the final approach fix, and the runway. So it will populate Intel, Zabax, and the runway. That's it. So I don't have Nike and I don't have Flower. And what if Portland approach gives me a heading to intercept between Nike and Flower? How will I know when I pass Nike so I could drop down to 2,000 feet? You see my point? And what if ATC gets busy or lazy and at one point they say direct Vance cleared RNAV 31 left? You know that's possible and allowed. They could do that and sometimes they will. Now I have to reload the whole approach because I don't have Vance, Flower, or Nike. Now here's how I've been taught by my mentor, who is a United Airlines 777 pilot. When you start briefing the approach, hopefully you're still at cruise or high up on the descent, always start with where you are in relation to the airport. Let's imagine I'm flying from Seattle to Portland and I'm coming from the north. In my citation, it's always a Helens 6 arrival, but that actually doesn't really matter. I'm flying my clearance, and at some point around Newburgh VOR, ATC will give me some heading. I've been patiently waiting for this. The first heading is monumental. It's what I call a trigger point. It begins a new chapter in the flight. It triggers a new thing. Number 1, I've just been given a heading. That means terrain responsibility is on ATC. I'm not sure what that means to you, but it does have a meaning. It means that you're automatically protected from terrain and ATC cannot get you lower than their charted MVA. So there will be some limit to how low they could descend you. Just be aware of that. Number 2, everything that happens before has all disappeared. The arrival, the altitude restrictions, the charted speed restrictions, they just poof, they disappeared. You're at their mercy now, and they are controlling you like a puppet. And you want that because they're gonna feed you to the approach. So they will feed you to the approach at or above their MVA, and you could descend down per the approach if you follow it properly. And the approach design will protect you from hitting mountaintops. You see, ATC can only take you down as low as their MVA, and which let's say is 2,000 feet. And the approach will take you down lower than ATC is even capable of. So an approach is not all about leading you to the runway. It's also protecting you from terrain. On another note, a missed approach procedure climbs you while protecting you from terrain to at least get at or above the MVA where ATC can take over and start pulling your strings. A lot of IFR students think that in the real world, if you go missed, you execute the missed approach as published and hold. That's bullshit. Maybe in lost comm scenarios, sure, but in normal situations, in real life, as soon as you climb and get above the MVA, the controller will snag you. They see you on the radar climbing away from the runway, but you're below their MVA, so they can't give you any headings. There's nothing they could do. But as soon as you're at or above the MVA, they'll ask you in plain English, what do you want to do? And you say, I want to try again. And they say, okay, fly heading this and this and this. I mean, you'll never even reach the hold point and execute that teardrop you've been practicing. So going back, the first heading from ATC, ding, ding, ding in your mind, you can now scroll down on your Garmin and sequence into that approach. Every other fix in your flight plan page is meaningless now except for your destination airport. Now we're coming from the north and there are many options they could give us. Let's be realistic though, it will either be vectors to final, which means, the standard 20 to 30 degree intercept to the final approach course. There'll be direct Nike, cleared for the RNAV 31 left, direct Flower, cleared RNAV 31 left, direct Mules, cleared RNAV 31 left. Use your logic and think what is the most likely and what is most possible and what is most probable. But not what is just most likely, but also what gives you the most waypoints in your flight plan. What do I mean by that? If you load the approach starting Mules, Flower won't exist. If you load the approach starting at Flower, mules won't exist. There are many other combinations here. I would never load flour as a starting point anyway, because if I load Bonneville or Ogbu, I'll get flour for free there automatically, you see? Anyway, coming from the north, I suspect the biggest possibilities are either direct Nike or I'll get a heading intercept between Nike and Intel. So I'll load mules. Wait, why mules? Because mules is to the north. And if I load mules, I'll automatically get Nike as a freebie. Actually, it's not that unreasonable to get direct mules cleared RNAV 31 left. Although it never happens, and I say never to tell you that one time Portland approach was so slammed, they didn't have time to feed me close, so they just said, maintain 6,000 direct mules cleared RNAV 31 left. And they were done with me. They were done with my ass. But I had mules loaded as a fix because I was using this logic method. But now we're on this ATC heading, 180, and we're over Portland International Airport at 6,000 feet, and it looks sort of like we're heading right towards mules or Nike, I'm not sure. Fine, I'll leave my Garmin as direct mules for now. Doesn't matter, I'm in heading mode anyway. So now we're getting closer to mules, but it looks like we're not so direct to it anymore. We'll pass by it. So what's the next possibility that gives the most waypoints? Direct Nike. Remember, just direct on the Garmin, but I'm still flying the assigned heading. If ATC tells me direct Nike, cleared RNAV, 31 left, I'll just hit direct enter, and go nav mode, done. But now we're at 4,000 feet and closer, and I get a heading from ATC, turn right heading 210. I don't feel like it's direct Nike anymore. It's looking more like somewhere between Nike and Intel. Okay, now I have high confidence. They won't clear me from Nike, and they can't clear me direct Intel. It's illegal. So I can activate the leg between Nike and Intel. It will be an intercept, and I have activated it where it will be. These logic steps may seem complicated, but they use 2 or 3 brain cells after you've done it a few times. If Jerry would have done these logical steps, considered vectors to final as a bad feature, when ATC would have cleared him for the approach, it would have already been perfectly sequenced in his Garmin in the perfect place, and all he'd have to do is arm the nav mode or approach mode and wait for the autopilot to capture. Understanding ATC, what they are allowed or not allowed to do, and what is their procedure can help you predict what they're going to do to your aircraft strings so you can better be prepared for the next step. Getting caught with your pants down in front of your girlfriend's okay, and maybe even good, but in the plane, in the clouds, never a good idea. So special thanks to Jerry Wagner, who first of all had the balls and the courage to share his mistake on YouTube for all of us to learn from. And another thanks for him for letting me make this video as a gutless Monday morning quarterback. But let's admit that we're all capable of the silliest mistakes, landing on the wrong runway or even landing at the wrong airport. Under very special and specific circumstances, it could be us. Cheers and thanks for watching.